Alright, so you just got into off-roading, overlanding, even just camping, and you keep hearing everybody talk about airing down. You don't know necessarily what that is, what the benefits are, if you should or shouldn't do it. So I figured today we'll kind of go through some of that, and we'll talk about some different options that you have for airing down, airing up. I did a video on different compressor systems and stuff, so I'll go into a little bit of detail on that, but I'm not going to get super deep into that. And then we'll move into my air system and what I'm doing to improve upon it, and then plans for the future as well. So let's start talking about the benefits of airing down and why you should or shouldn't, or when you should or shouldn't. So in order to understand airing down, we also need to understand your tires, right? So your standard tire, when inflated how it's supposed to be, kind of looks like this, with, you know, your contact patch on the ground. So bring that in a little bit so you can see. Alright, now when you air down, what this does is it brings your tire down and it almost kind of bulges at the side and makes that contact patch a little bit bigger. Now obviously my drawings are horrible, but you get the picture. So it makes this contact patch right here, the part that's in contact with the road, a lot larger. Now this is beneficial for a couple of reasons. One, when your tire's fully aired up, this sidewall is very rigid, and that's where you get a rougher ride, especially on, you know, it might even be something as simple as like a forest road where there's minor bumps, maybe some light washboards, anything like that, and you really feel it. It's because this sidewall is so rigid. There's nothing here to absorb those impacts. When you air down and it makes this sidewall soft, then it has something to absorb those impacts on. Now, this also gives a benefit in terrain such as like snow. If you are in the snow area and you're fully inflated with this rigid sidewall, it basically acts like a pizza cutter running through the snow. It has a very narrow, very skinny pattern, and it slices through the snow and it'll get you stuck a lot faster. Whereas this has a much larger footprint and it will allow you to basically float on top of the snow. Think about it like if you're in a pool and you go to step your foot in the pool, your foot goes straight through. But if you put a, you know, boogie board, small flotation device, something like that under your foot, it disperses that weight across a larger area. Now when you step on it, it has to try and push down and you don't sink nearly as easily. If you have 4 little spots like this trying to jump into a pool, it's going to slice right through it. If you have 4 large spots like this, now, you know, you and a friend are standing on 4 boogie boards and it'll probably support the weight of you if you can balance. Most of us never been able to do that. I know we've all tried. So this is also helpful in sand for the same reason. Allows you to float up on top. It also gives another couple of benefits as far as traction. So when you are airing down like this, it provides a much larger footprint, which means there's a lot more of your tire tread in contact with the ground, which allows you a lot better traction. If you are in an area where there's a lot of rocks, maybe you're doing, you know, some obstacles, stuff like that, it allows your tire, instead of coming up over, let's say there's a rock here, instead of your tire just rolling over the surface of it, if it's all hard, there's only a very small contact point. You know, if we look at my hand, there's a small contact point when your tire is fully inflated in contact with that rock or that obstacle. Whereas if you air down, it allows that tire to relax all the way around it. So now there's a much larger contact surface and you're getting grip on all sides. So it allows you to really pull up and over that obstacle. So when should you air down, right? And how much? So if you are on, smoother graded like forest roads, I would say, maybe down to 25 to 30 psi is fine. It's going to give you a little bit of sidewall flexion as well as a little smoother ride. If you are out hitting some rougher trails, going to have some obstacles, anything like that, then I would go down, maybe 16 to 20, 18 to 20, somewhere around in there. If you are in snow, it really depends on your tires as well as the depth of the snow. So if you're just on the road and it starts snowing and it's just started snowing, I wouldn't even stop and air down. I would just try and get home or to camp or wherever you're heading. It's not worth the wait. Just try and get where you're going. If you get stuck and you're trying to get yourself out, the best thing that you can do is from the people that live in like the areas that get a lot of snow, they say it's the single theory or rule or whatever it is. It's single digit PSI and single digit mile an hour. So you want to go down to like 9 PSI and 9 miles per hour max. And that will be your best bet to try and get out of a stuck situation in some sort of snow. This theory also works with sand. And again, there's a whole other slew of things that go into that as far as tire type, everything like that. I don't want to get that far into the weeds. This is just introduction. Speaking of tire type, if you are running factory tires, okay, something that has a street pattern or an all-season pattern on it, you do not want to go any lower than about 20 psi on those regardless. You shouldn't be doing obstacles. You probably shouldn't be in the snow unless you got trapped somewhere, and you probably shouldn't be in the sand. Get some aftermarket tires that are meant for those terrains. If you are running aftermarket tires, the reason that you can do that is because of the sidewall and the load rating. When you air down, there are portions on the side of your tire, the side wall. So this right here is your sidewall, and this is the corner, but it's also where the sidewall seam starts. When you air down, portions of this come in contact with the surface of the road. If you don't have a higher rating tire, you're going to cause problems down the road. Obviously, if you're stuck or it's an emergency situation, yeah, air it down, get unstuck, and then if you have the capability, air back up as soon as possible. Get out of that emergency situation. But you do not want to be driving for long periods of time aired down on factory tires. You will cause sidewall collapse and failure. So don't do that. The aftermarket tires that are designed for different terrains and different trails are designed to be utilized in that way. So for instance, the tires that I run are a 10 ply E load rating tire. They can handle a lot of weight, and the plies, the layers, that's what the ply is, the layers in this tire is a very high number to allow me to air down as low as I need to for that aspect. So there's your introduction to airing down. All right, now let's talk about airing up. So now you have gotten yourself aired down, you're done with your trail for the day, and it's time to air back up. What do you need, right? What kind of compressor do you need? Do you need a four-way system? Do you need the Wi-Fi system? Do you need an ARB compressor? Do you need, what do you need? And a lot of this comes down to your specific needs as a person and what kind of vehicle you're running, and also your budget has a lot to do with it. So if you're just starting out and you're unsure of what you're going to need or how often you're going to be doing this, my biggest suggestion for you would be to ask your buddies that you're going with if you can use their compressor or their system or whatever to air back up. a couple of times until you really know what you're going to need or what you're going to do. I let friends of mine use, my stuff on the trail all the time. I've had issues with my compressor where I had to use someone else's stuff on the trail. So it's usually not a big deal. So don't be afraid to ask someone. Just ask ahead of time so that they know and can plan accordingly and don't leave without you. So for me personally, I started out with just a cheap $30 Amazon compressor, and that lasted me probably about 6 months. As I was just getting into it, I wasn't really hitting the trails that often. So that allowed me to, go off-road, air down, but it took a long time to air back up. I got real fed up with it when the last time I used it, I went to air back up, and it took me about an hour to get it aired back up, just because it's not meant for that. Like, it wasn't meant for my size tires. It wasn't meant to be used all the time. It was a cheap emergency roadside compressor. If you're going to run one of the smaller, inexpensive compressors, I would look into the duty cycle aspect of it. So you want to run something that's got as high a CFM as possible, which is the amount of air that it flows. And then you also want to check into the duty cycle aspect of it. So they'll either be like 50% or 100%. Some of them, I think I've seen some like 75%. But basically what it is it'll say like it can run 100% duty cycle for 30 minutes, or it can run, 50% for 20 minutes, or something of that aspect. And that's what you want to pay attention to, because if you have a 5.6 CFM compressor, which is like I have, but it'll only run 100% for 20 minutes, well, maybe a 4 CFM compressor that'll run 100% for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever is better. So look into that. That's a good place to start. All right, lighting was terrible out there, so decided to try and move inside, see if it's any better. So next comes into what kind of system do you need? There's a bunch of different systems. First and foremost, if you just buy, your inexpensive compressor, or most compressors when you first get them, are just going to have a single connection point to the tire. Okay, so that means that you're going to connect it to one tire, you're going to turn it on, you're going to air up that tire, and then when that one's done, you'll turn it off, disconnect it, move to the next tire, connect it, turn it on, all the way around. Okay, then you have like two-way connectors, exactly what it sounds like. You're going to hook it up to 2 tires, turn it on, so on and so forth. Then there's 4-way. And then they have things like the different brands out there have like the Wi-Fi kits, which I think is basically all 4. And then it comes with a valving system, pressure gauges, stuff like that. If you're going to start looking into the different systems, you need to know the difference between an open valve system and a closed valve system. This is going to be important depending on the type of compressor that you get. So like my compressor is a Smittybilt 2781 or 61, whatever it is, the 5.6 CFM one. It originally came as an open loop system, meaning when you turn the compressor on, air is already coming out of the line. Okay. If you were to change out that end to where it doesn't come out of the line, or put in some sort of 4-way system where you can close a valve and stop flowing air to all 4 tires, that air goes back to the compressor. That compressor is not equipped with a pressure shutoff switch, and it'll actually damage the compressor. Ask me how I know. So like I said, it's important that you know the difference and if it's open or closed and what kind of system you're going to be using. This is, again, why I recommend go out on the trail with some friends a couple of times. See what kind of stuff they're using. Look at your budget, because if you're looking at like the Wi-Fi system plus ARB Twin, which is like the go-to top-end compressor, installation, all the bells and whistles, where basically you just jump out, grab a couple lines and connect them to the 4 corners of the vehicle, hit a switch, and it's going to air up on you. I mean, you're talking a couple $1,000s by the time you get everything put together and installed and everything like that. it can get real expensive real fast. There are different aspects out there that you can do, you know, on your own. There's definitely some individuals I know locally on some of the forums and pages and stuff. There's a few people that make their own kind of four-way systems. And those are great. You know, they're usually a couple $100. Not bad. I chose to go a little different route. All right, let's pause the video there for a second. As I was editing, I realized that I got off on a tangent and didn't talk about a couple of aspects here. Number one is space. So if you have the four-way system, you got to think you have probably close to 30 feet of line that is going to be bundled up. And I mean, it's a big package that, you know, you got to look into. That's just one more thing that you have to remember to put in the truck or keep in the truck or store away, you know, whatever aspect that is. That's why I went with the system that I did, that you're getting ready to see, and why it worked well for me is because it's all already on the truck. I don't have to remember to bring anything with me. It's already in the vehicle, and that was the reason that I chose the system that I did. So now let's get back to it. Let me open up the truck here and we will talk about my setup and how much it was and the changes that I'm getting ready to make. So here is my system. Like I said, it's the 2781 Smittybilt compressor. Now, because of the way my system is set up, I had to do some modifications to it and add in a pressure switch. Comes up to a standard junction. This line gets extremely hot, so I wrapped it in some raw carbon fiber. Comes over here to my homemade valving system. I'll put a little video clip explaining that valving system right here. Manifold for onboard air. So we've got in from the tank, out for the dump, front, rear, and then the gauge. And it'll sit like that back behind the seat where I can see the gauge and reach the switches. All right, so as explained in the valving video there, basically I can open the valve here and dump the air out, and then close this one, let the air in, dump the air out. So air out goes through this line and then back behind here, and there's a little vent flapper right behind this panel that allows the cabin pressure to vent to the outside, and I'll put a little video here of what that looks like. Before I buttoned all this back up, I wanted to show kind of how this is ran. So here is my line out to the rear. My line coming in from the front is over here. And of course, everything's labeled. And then this one here is just my dump valve. So when I open the valve to let the air out, it'll just flap through these little flappers in the back here and just goes out the back, but it doesn't interfere with any of the factory stuff. I just notched this little piece here, put a little zip tie to hold it in place. This one down here, there was a rubber stopper in there. I just drilled a hole into the middle of it and left it there, and then it comes out between the cab and the bed and goes right down underneath. I'll show all that later. Then I can, when I'm done airing down, I can close this valve. When it's time to air up, I can open this valve and watch the gauge. And as I go through, I can kick it on and off until it meets pressure. This works pretty good, but there are a couple of issues with this system. One, that compressor was not designed to run these size tires for that long. It only takes about 7 or 8 minutes to air up all four, but because of where the compressor is and how it was originally designed, it gets really hot. And I've had it shut off on me a couple of times running through the temperature switch, and then you got to wait a couple minutes. So I started doing 2 tires at a time. And I haven't had any issues with it there as far as shutting off. It'll air up the 2, I turn it off, disconnect those lines, connect the other two, turn it back on, and let it run, and it does fine there. So eventually I do want to upgrade to a different compressor, but I've had this one for almost a year now, and it's ran great in that aspect. Like I said, I'm definitely using it for more than it was intended to do. So let's talk about how my connections are. In the rear, what I did is I ran these lines all the way in to the outside here, and then I just connected them here with standard fittings, and then I have these little junctions that I plug in, and then they come out here to the outside of the tire, and I just connect it when I'm ready to go. I did make some little plugs for those. I just basically capped off the end of one of the fittings to where I can keep this in there, and it keeps dirt and debris and everything else out of there, which works okay. But as you can see, the whole inside of this is just filthy, and I mean, this isn't even that bad. So when you get done on the trail, if it's muddy, snowy, whatever, you're reaching in, and now your arms are covered in mud and dirt, and your hands are all filthy, and your lines are all gummed up, and it's gross. So that's one of the things that I'm going to change. And in the front, this one I actually really like. So the driver's side just sits next to the battery and drops right out, and then the passenger side, I left it coiled up so you can see, sits right here next to the air box, and it just rolls up and tucks in there, and you can just tuck it right away. So I'm going to do something similar to this for the back, and I'll do it on either side, and that way I can just pull it out and connect, and I don't have to deal with the extensions or reaching in. I mean, look at that, I'm already dirty just talking about it. So I won't have to worry about these extensions like this anymore. This is for the other side in the rear. So I won't have to deal with these anymore. But the way that I'm going to design it is I am still going to, on that side, I'm still going to have one of these fittings down at the bottom. Here, let me just show you. All right, so over here on the passenger side of the vehicle, there's these openings here, and I mean, they're pretty big. I mean, that's probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches of dead space here that goes all the way up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of tubing that will slide down in here that I can secure, and then I'm going to coil that hose down in that tubing. Maybe, depending on if it'll stay itself in there without flopping all over the place and getting all crazy, then I won't do that. But if it won't, I'm going to do the tubing and get it all secured. But what I'm going to do is down here in the very corner, I'm going to take this same fitting that is right there, and I'm going to put it down in that corner, and then I will still have the extension connector down here that I'll just leave it plugged in for now. But what that will allow me to do is, if I get into a situation where someone else needs air, I can pull that clip off from that extension, and I have one in the front right here as an extra air port that I can plug into then and just bring up whoever vehicle needs air, and I can air them up as well. So I do carry an extra, I think it's an 8-foot hose in my recovery box, 8 foot of air line there. So that'll be something that I can also utilize. So between the two of those, I'll probably have, I don't know, 18, 20 feet, something like that, because I can put a little bit extra line on that passenger side. So that's basically the introduction, kind of how my system is set up and what I'm going to do. So obviously I can't do it all in this episode because it would be way too long. So stick around for part 2 and potentially part 3 in a couple of weeks. Part 3 would be in a couple of weeks. Part 2 I'll probably release later this week. But part 2, we're going to go through the updates and kind of how it all works and see if it's an improvement. And then in part 3, I'm going to be adding in an air tank to where I won't have to run the compressor as much in order to maintain the air constant pressure to the system. So thanks for watching, and stick around.